Rogue Leader really started, I think last year in the summer of 2000 when Nintendo had its new console almost done and we were getting early prototype hardware. And at that point in time, everybody, having worked on Battle for Naboo, an Episode 1 game for the Nintendo 64, here at Factor 5 decided, hey, now is the time to do a follow-up to our most successful game up to that date, which was Rogue Squadron on the Nintendo 64. And GameCube, as the machine wasn't even called at that time, was really perfect for envisioning the Star Wars universe or recreating the Star Wars universe, especially the classic Star Wars universe, in a way which never has been possible before in interactive media. And we set out, we had a 19-day time frame for a Japanese trade show called Space World to create a teaser version. LucasArts said, yeah, you can do it, you've got the hardware, so let's give it a try. And Nintendo wanted to present their new hardware there. So we brought a fight, first of all, an introduction cutscene, which is on this DVD as a teaser trailer, that and a playable version of the Death Star endurance level, which you can unlock here. We brought that together in the 19 days, which was a really stunning proof of concept that you could, on this new machine GameCube, create games very, very, very quickly with high production values, which was important. And that then basically, over the next half year, while we finished Battle for Naboo, led into the real Rogue Leader, which was actually started in February of this year, 2001.
Tense moment.
Doing fog. Doing fog.
One of the main things why everything had to work out was basically the time frame, because usually nowadays huge games like Rogue Leader take 18 to 24 months to produce, and since we wanted to hit launch of the console, we had to get the game done in 8 months, which is an insane time frame, but we thought it's possible because we've got a very good core technical team. We knew what GameCube could do. We were one of the first developers in the world to have access to GameCube, and all the support from Nintendo, which was fantastic.
I would like to say they're treating me well here. They give me 1 meal a day.
The typical game production for this, which is probably pretty much a prototype for how making a game works, started in, I guess, late December of 2000, where basically the team sat down, or a core team sat down. In this case, the mission designers, myself as the director, Brett Toasty, the producer, and then various people who wanted to join, and we sat down and tried to flesh out a design. And at that point, really, the planning with the programming team starts. The software engineers, or programmers as we call them, basically sit together and they try to determine, reading through the design, which different parts of the engine have to be done. And we needed something for the so-called tile map levels, which works like a puzzle, which is the Death Star, the second Death Star, and parts of Bespin and the Imperial Academy. And we needed a landscape engine, obviously, for the landscapes. We needed space, which is very easy. You don't even need an engine, you need just a sphere with stars on it. At that point, where the programmers were pretty convinced that they could do it, art already had started. Our lead artist, Paul Topoulos, had basically pulled everything out of the archives which was available. Some of that material is usable, some of it isn't. So we had one modeler, for example, starting in anticipation of the project last year in summer, building really high polygon, very detailed models of all of the Star Wars player craft. And Bastian, the modeler who did that, he was working basically during the whole time just on the player craft. And so the art asset generation starts at that point. Paul coordinated with the other artists, and then we divided it up into strength. So there are certain people like Bastian who are very good about mechanical structures, so he was perfect for those models. Or Mario Wagner, our art director here, he's also very good at mechanical structures and these things. Then we've got other people like Armando Afre or Corset Karatas who are good at organic structures. So we went through the Star Wars universe and said, okay, what's organic? What do we need organic? And assign it to these people. a story which went through the gaming press and the internet, which was often told, was that we got models from ILM, which isn't true, because ILM models usually are done with so-called NURBS, whereas in games we're still working with polygons most of the time. So the NURBS models from ILM wouldn't help us that much, because the work to transform them into polygons is quite hefty. The next challenge then, if you're getting the first art assets together and the programmers have created the basis of your engine, at that point, hopefully the mission designers come in. And Jamie, Al, Chris, and Chris Crawford, our level designers, they basically came in and grabbed all the art assets at the time, and then in a proprietary tool, which we have been using for years and have developed here, are basically grabbing all of these assets and placing them, and they can transform them into a game with the assets which they get from the programmers. So basically, if you've got a TIE fighter, they can tell in the tool the TIE fighter to behave in a certain way. That's in a very crude form the description of how you create a game. We certainly were helped by pretty good tools which we had. One of the main outside tools we were using was Alias Maya, which is one of the big 3D packages which also movie production companies are using, and which was good for a lot of our art. But we also created a lot of our in-house tools. On the sound side, an interesting development was, for the first time we could do 5.1 full 5-channel sound, which only came into existence relatively late in the process when we got into contact with Dolby, because we did develop the GameCube music system called Musix, and in the end we had to convince Dolby that it would be possible with their new ProLogic 2 technology to get real 5-channel sound out of it. So that was one more challenge where, in an already tight schedule, our programmers had to sit down and really pull it off in the shortest time frame possible. But yeah, I think in the end it all came together pretty well. Hi and welcome to the DVD Rogue Leader developer commentary. My name is Julian Eggebrecht and I'm director of the game. What does a director of a video game do? I guess anything which you don't like about the game, you can blame on me, and hopefully a couple of the things which you do like about the game, although usually other people can take credit for that. So I'm mainly here in the commentary to introduce the people who worked on the game together with me, and to maybe guide them with my questions into the right direction. And the first level we're going to start out with is our training mission here on Tatooine. And I'm going to be talking to Chris Cly, who was one of the main level designers on the game.
Yeah, basically, our thoughts behind Tatooine Training were, we wanted to, because the campaign missions are really intense and the player has to cover a lot of bases at one time. We wanted him to have a chance to fly in an environment without a lot of pressure. We wanted him to have a chance to learn flight controls, some basic combat controls, and at the same time sort of explore. There are different things you can do in the mission. You can find little things like bantha herds and sand crawlers and all those cool things that we know and love from A New Hope.
Plus also I think it came out of the fact that we couldn't, for the hell of it, think of a campaign mission which would have played on Tatooine.
Right, yeah.
Convincingly, because it's very hard. I mean, Tatooine is basically the Skywalker's homeworld, and within the 3 movies it's kind of weird to go there with battlecraft and everything.
Yeah.
So we just thought of, hey, why don't we pick Tatooine as really for fun level, as opposed to the first Rogue Squadron, where Tatooine was used for a real campaign mission, which in the end was a little bit weird.
Yeah.
Put it that way. Right. The other person we've got along here is Jim Moore, who's one of the artists on the game, and Tatooine probably is the level where he did the most stuff on, right? Can you talk a little bit about it, Jim?
Well, with Tatooine, I'd say the biggest challenge was that would be the sand, on account of all the sand at Tatooine. And so, me and Paul Kothlis, the lead art director guy here, we went through the internet and got a lot of pictures of sand. And we decided to take the sand and, using Photoshop, copy and paste the sand into the files.
We should mention those are royalty free because there's a sand,
Fortunately,
not copyrighted material.
Fortunately, we changed the sand enough so that the people who took the pictures of the sand wouldn't be able to sue us.
I mean, one of the things which I thought was interesting that when we initially got the sand on, and that was the same case for Hoth, I guess, that it didn't look like much, and then only the capabilities of the new engine and basically GameCube really brought it alive with the bump mapping and with the detailed stuff in the distance.
Definitely. Pretty much, we could have taken pictures of hunks of concrete and put them down there, and with the bump map giving the wavy patterns on there, it would look like sand.
Yeah, which was nice for the diversity. I mean, you in the canyons you see much more of the rocky terrain in Tatooine, and oh yeah, one of the things which I really like about the level is, which at this point, when you hear the commentary, hopefully you should have discovered, is the fact that it's there in 4 daylight zones, and I guess you guys had quite a bit to do to get the skies right for that, plus the lighting.
Sure, that required taking an entirely different set of clouds and sky colors, as well as the lighting in the level itself, which is all real time, and sort of matching them up together for a morning, a daylight, a dusk, and a nighttime in Tatooine.
I'm here with Thomas Engel, who happens to be the technical director here at Factor 5, and who also did a lot of the base stuff for Rogue Leader, a lot of the base conceptual stuff of the engine, driving the game, and Al Chen, who is one of the level designers and who's responsible for the first level, the first real level after Tatooine, the Death Star surface and trench run. Who are we going to start out with? Well, maybe Thomas, about technical sides of how do you get it to look like the movie?
Well, actually, the basic plan for the Death Star surface goes back to Space World. It is actually, well, all the ideas are stolen from the movie makers, of course. The guys at Industrial Light and Magic actually used little tiles to build their gigantic surfaces of the Death Star. And so do we. So this is all, you could imagine a big checkerboard with geometry on it. And that is what makes it look really like the movie, because it is like the movie. Of course, on top of that, to make it look more realistic, you have shadows, you have the big turrets, you have explosions going on, and all that type of stuff. And the trick here really is to make it look as vast and as, well, deterrently huge as in the movie, which was one thing that kind of made it necessary to have pretty sophisticated loading mechanisms in there.
LOD is basically
Yes.
Level of detail.
Level of detail, so what you don't see, you don't need to draw. And of course we, on the artistic side, had great care taken that the lighting is like in the movie and that the color tones are like in the movie. So hopefully this thing opens up and you think, wow, the movie.
Well, an interesting detail I noticed when watching the movie recently again was that we've got real-time light everywhere being cast from the lasers and everything,
Yeah.
which isn't the case in the movie because they didn't
True.
have ways when
True.
compositing together their effects to have actually real-time lights on
Yeah.
there. So
A couple of other things that again we stole. If you look at the turrets and how they shoot, then you'll see little flashes going on. And if you're really keen and sharp-eyed, then you'll see there's actually little circles. And if you step through Star Wars, you'll see they use little circles in front of the turrets to make the blast a bit more impact.
all right, content-wise, Al, what was the philosophy behind the first level?
Well, I mean, in terms of like the design side, the big challenge for this level was to recreate the movie, but also provide a nice, easy way for the player to get into the game and not to, overwhelm the player initially. So we basically just kind of looked at the movie and looked for really marquee moments of the movie, and we tried to recreate those scenes, such as the deflection tower attack, the first engagements with the TIE fighters, and also the classic trench run. From those elements, we managed to put together something that's challenging but not overwhelming to the player. And I think it's a good introduction for most people to Rogue Leader, and it's also something everybody remembers from the movie, especially the trench run.
People don't remember those obstacles you have to fly
Oh,
through.
well, the obstacles were kind of doing a little tribute to the old Atari arcade game. Since it would be very boring for the player to just go in a straight line down a corridor like that, we decided to put obstacles in there. And surprisingly enough, the obstacles were probably the hardest part of putting this level together, because it's tricky to figure out how much obstacle to provide the player and still keep it fun, but still keep it from being frustrating for the first level.
Not make it too hard for a first level. We had a lot of tweaking going on just around E3. Basically, whenever one of the journalists looking at the game at the time was coming in, he was our next test candidate. So basically, we had somebody from Time magazine play it, and oops, he played really badly. So he was our blind tester. So next version was somebody from Newsweek, and basically we had toned it down a little bit for him, and then the next journalist would be our next blind tester.
Of course, you can't be sure. You can't just be that the Newsweek's guys are way better.
But that worked out pretty well. I mean, the level has barely changed since E3, and it's almost the same tweaking wise. I mean, you changed a little bit, I guess, but that's about it. I've got here with me David Strapinis, who is director of animation here at Factor 5 and who did quite a bit of the cutscenes in the game, and Chris Crawford, who was level designer for Ison Corridor. Let's start out with you, David, because the level is starting out with you.
This was one of my favorite levels for cutscenes, simply because the everything about it is so dramatic and very cool looking. So it's fun to shoot and work with. And it also has, I think, the only piece of comedy in the game, which is the intro, where it's kind of the Star Destroyer nose coming over, and then the big reveal.
Which is taken from Star Wars 1, but
4,
kind of
Star Wars 4.
All right, episode 4, yeah. So in general, about cutscenes, how do you do cutscenes? Because obviously they're real-time cutscenes. There's a little bit of video here and there, but how are they done?
Well, the process usually starts with talking with the level designer over what he needs to accomplish with the cutscenes, story, mechanics of the game, like for this one, craft switching, and then we sit down, talk about what we want to accomplish with the cutscene, and then I sit and I play the level for a couple of hours and try to get some ideas as to what are cool areas of the level, and we usually storyboard it out, or at least make quick visual notes, and then it's just a simple process of working within Maya.
Maya is a software tool?
Yeah, Maya is our 3D application, which we do all the artwork in.
Yeah.
Both animation and models and everything like that.
How many movie tricks are you able to use nowadays? Because I mean, compared to say N64 or even the Super Nintendo, the cutscenes can be much more elaborate, obviously.
The cutscenes can be a lot more elaborate, and we can do some camera tricks, but some of the we're one of the big problems we actually have for the cutscenes is things without a visual reference in space. Trying to get the sense that the ships are moving, which in both Star Wars and in the movies, what they would do is they just move the stars in the background. Mm-hmm. But here we can't do that because if we move the star, in order to do that, the lighting on the ships change. So we have to figure out tricks there to try to get a sense of the ships moving and that kind of stuff. But we can do camera cuts, which are pretty cool. We can pretty much do a lot of the tricks. The one problem, like I said, is not being able to cheat as much as you'd want to with rendering.
Chris, about Ison Corridor, what's special about the level, or what's specific about the level?
Well, it's the first level in the game where there's no height map, no ground, that is, to use as a reference for the player, so it's unique in that way. And also, it's the first level to introduce craft switching, so that the player can use a different craft than the one they started with. Mm-hmm. So, had to be kind of careful in that I didn't want to overwhelm the player with too many or rather too deadly enemies in this level. Try to keep them pretty stupid compared to some of the other levels. As for the craft switching thing, the way we introduce that is through one of David's cutscenes. We just show Wedge switching craft, and hopefully that will explain it pretty well to the player.
In terms of the second part, how's the fog done? In the sense of, do you actually do those clouds, or how's it handled for a level designer?
Well, the clouds that you see in the far distance, those are actually paintings done by our lead artist, and that's basically just a big object in the background that has those paintings on it. And then as far as the clouds that you actually fly through, that is a real volumetric cloud, which I placed. It's basically just a big squashed sphere that I place in the level to define the range that the volumetric cloud fills.
And then basically, based on what the artist puts on it, it takes up that, but it does it in 3D.
Right, correct.
So it looks like a cloud in 3D.
Mhm.
Yeah. Plus, gameplay-wise, it's supposed to force you to use the targeting computer a bit more than in the first level.
Right, yeah. It's deliberately, actually, even the first part and the second part, the enemies are sort of deliberately obscured, and we play voice lines to encourage people to try out the targeting computer and identify enemies that way.
All right, we're here with Paul Topoulos, lead artist, art director, and the general grand wizard of art on the project, and Jamie Armaker, who's another level designer and responsible for the Battle of Hoth, which we're playing right now. And David is also with us again for the cutscene side of Hoth, which is the most elaborate cutscene. So let's start probably on the design side, Jamie. Why is Hoth what it is, as opposed to the movie and as opposed to the other versions of Hoth, which previous games had?
That's a good question. Hoth is just a big open battle for you to fight in, while the whole time trying to get across the impression that you're doing a little bit of good, but it's not going to matter.
And the not mattering, you don't mind too much.
No, it gives people enough to do to blow things up, enough explosions to make them happy, and yeah, that's it.
It's also the first time the ground troops come in, right?
The ground troops are the best part, I think. They really make it feel alive. That's what sets it apart from previous versions of Hoth that we've seen. Tony put in incredible amounts of control over them so that they'll react to any sorts of situations that are going on, including your communications.
Tony, what was the specific challenge in because it's for the first time that Hoth has been recreated with the troops, but also for the first time, I guess, in video games that you had these amounts of troops in an action game, because usually it's a real-time strategy thing.
I guess the biggest problem was just trying to get that sheer number of troops. I think there are hundreds on a level, just having the army feel to it.
Mm-hmm.
And each one is like several hundred polygons, fully 3D models, animations.
Yeah.
And they've all got their own little minds, so they'll walk about or shoot, depending on how close you are to the targets and stuff.
Yeah. Are they basically done the same way as the Thai AI, or?
It's exactly the same. I guess it's like modifications, so like when you hit them, they don't like blow sparks and things.
What can they do? I mean, how flexible are they really? You can send them after things, right?
Pretty much anything they'll do needs really. They can attack targets, they can defend where they are, go to certain places, change formation.
Mm-hmm. Any specific challenges there? Because I mean, one of the things I remember from the Hoth battle that initially and for quite a long time, Hoth was the slowest level in the whole game. I mean, it had real severe frame rate problems, as in it wasn't running even closely to 60. It was down to 20, 20 even 15, which would be more in 64 frame rate. So what was so tricky about Hoth?
It's just all the AI calculations for every trooper, just trying to minimizing that overload and also drawing them as well, because I guess each one of these is like a normal character in itself really.
Yeah.
And there's hundreds of these, and then it's not just that, you've got the ATSTs and the ATATs and everything else going on the level as well.
How long did it take to, let's say you've got something up and running and then you're optimizing the things to really move fast, how long does something like that take to get it efficient?
Normally maybe a few days to a week, but you're always optimizing right till the end.
Which means we're not done optimizing now, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Talking about the ground guys, in general, the art, why does Hoth look like Hoth? Paul?
Well, I think the interesting thing is just, which Hoth is it? I mean, we know it's all about Hoth. But I mean, when you think about the movie, the color scheme changes from shot to shot. I mean, it goes from some of the live action sequences that they filmed when it was overcast, and goes to clear blue sunny sky. And I think that was one of the things that we talked about early on, was exactly which one do you do, because you don't want it to be too perfectly happy blue, and yet you don't want it to be overcast.
Yeah, it's amazing how badly, if you look at the movie from shot to shot, really the ILM shots are matching the live action. I mean, it's completely different skies, it's completely different looks of the scenes, and I guess we have tons of reference material, but it almost doesn't help you.
Well, and I think it was interesting too, because this was the first height map level that we did, and so it was, in a way, it was very forgiving in that you did have a snow cover covering most of the landscape. That actually texturing it was difficult to actually get the process going, but it was relatively easy once we found out, and it's probably one of the better looking height map levels that we have.
What's a height map, and how is the landscape generation process, maybe in a untechnical way, working?
First, Jamie, for gameplay reasons, made a grayscale image, which would just be an image made out of black and white. Whatever is white goes high, whatever is dark goes down, and he makes a little map for gameplay reasons, where a valley should be in the hills and everything. And then we just do a general snow texture around and actually map in where the rocks and things would be, trying to sort of figure out where sort of the landscape would be, where the wind would uncover the rocks on the hills, and just looking at a lot of reference. And I remember I went to the ranch and got a whole bunch of books to use as reference of Norway and all sorts of different places. Plus, we should mention Bespin has incredible models on that level. They were beautiful.
Oh, the AT-ATs and the AT-STs.
Yeah, and the snow speeder in the cockpit.
Mm. One of the interesting things about Hoth also is that it's the only level, I guess, where we've got, based on the movie, basically all lasers are pink, right? Or pinkish red.
Yeah, it's interesting to sort of pick this apart. Because we've been doing it for how many years, and still.
You look at it and oh my God, the reference says ion cannon's blue, but the ion cannon clearly shoots red.
Right.
Or things where you would expect red lasers, they're actually pinkish, because somebody must have decided back then when they were doing the compositing in of the lasers, I guess. So coming back to the gameplay. What were challenges in Hoth specifically?
Challenges were to present like an overwhelming force attacking you, but something that didn't just completely destroy you outright. The other challenges were introducing something at the end that wasn't in the movie, with TIE bombers and things like that, attacking transports and making it different than the previous level. And the biggest challenge was integrating troop communication, talking to the troops and making them matter.
So cutscenes.
Yeah, this level has the dubious distinction of having the longest cutscene in the game, and I think the longest cutscene in Factor 5 history.
By far.
By far. One of the cutscenes in the level is over a minute and a half long, which we're, unfortunately for me, not big fans of cutscenes here, in the sense that we would prefer the player plays the game rather than watches a movie with a quartered remote control. So it was really long for us, and it was also one of the first cutscenes that we tackled, and that was a big mistake because we encountered it was also a good thing because we encountered every possible situation we could encounter in a cutscene in this. We had crafts that were flying craft, we had craft that were ground craft, we had ground creatures, both soldiers and what I call ground condors, which are like the AT-ATs and the AT-STs. It was also a story challenge because we are also trying to convey the fact that you start the level playing as one character, Luke Skywalker, and then after this cutscene you're now playing as Wedge Antilles, and we have to try to show the fact that and convey to the player that Luke got shut down, but he's not dead, and you're now playing as this other guy. And
I really hope that's believable because that was a big deal, and the design meetings we had was, well, how are we going to switch from Luke to Wedge? And the movie lends itself to it, but it's very radical to do it mid-level. So.
And we could have really cheated and just plugged in the video or something like that, but we didn't want to do that because it does too much of a break for the player.
Okay, that's it. And it's the monkeys. Thank the monkeys. All right, so this time we're going to select the Y-Wing for the first time and go to the Maw. I've got with me Holger Schmidt, who's the lead programmer and lead everything on Rogue Leader, and Al Chen again, who's the level designer on the Maw. So maybe start out, because we haven't talked too much about the GameCube in general. Since you're the lead programmer, you've got quite a bit to do, aside from Thomas, as the technical guy with the hardware. So how did GameCube influence the Rogue Leader progression and the project in general?
It's a good thing that it's so easy to program, but it's a bad thing that you don't have that much time to program it. I'd rather have spent more time programming it because it's such fun to actually work on the machine.
That's for the sequel.
Watch it on tape.
Yeah. But in general, maybe in comparison to the N64 and maybe a little bit PlayStation 2 because you programmed both, and before that many other machines. But what's the big difference compared to PlayStation and N64?
Well, PlayStation and N64 were about the same. Technically, it was the transition from 2D to 3D. So you had to fight both on the gameplay side with the new concept of making games in 3D, and on the technical side, you had to fight too, because it did draw polygons, but not a lot. So you couldn't achieve visually what you already achieved in 2D on the 16-bit machines, and you couldn't achieve that visually on the 32-bit machines. With GameCube, it's a step kind of like if you did the step from the NES machine or the Game Boy up to the Super Nintendo. That's the same step from Nintendo 64, PlayStation up to the GameCube. So you finally are able to not worry too much about the technical side, and you can concentrate a little bit on the gameplay.
Okay, so specifically about the Maw, maybe a little bit. Al, the Maw is the first Y-Wing level. So what's special about it? Why Y-Wing?
Well, I mean, basically, there's a lot of firsts in this level. I mean, we're talking about the first true mission featuring Wedge as the player character. We're also talking about flying the Y-Wing, which is a bomber. It also has the ion cannons and the player gets to use these new weapons for the first time. So we kind of designed this mission to kind of showcase these new weapons and capabilities. For instance, the tankers are just ripe for the bombing, and these shield projector things, the only way you can get at them is by charging up your ion cannons. So we basically integrate the teaching of these weapons into gameplay, so it's kind of transparent. It's not like your standard tutorial thing like press button here and then do this. It's very, very natural, very intuitive.
That's at least what we're hoping for. All right, second part of the level. This is mostly a bombing mission. So, right, the ATPTs. Where do the ATPTs come from? The ATPTs are non-classic Star Wars, right?
Yeah, I think they might be mentioned either in novels, the Rogue Squadron novels, or the comic books, I believe.
Yeah, and they were in the first game, of course.
They were, of course, in the original Rogue Squadron.
Yeah.
And they're quite handy in this very jagged, very dangerous terrain here. And they're fun to blow up. They're kind of cute. The whole idea with this second part of the level was we wanted to really guide the player around the level and turn it into almost like a railed experience without confining him to a rail. That's why we created this pretty elaborate train rail system so that the player won't really get lost on this level. All he has to do is just find the rails and follow it, and it'll take him to lots of targets of opportunity, lots of stuff to blow up.
How about difficulty progression? Because one of the big criticisms voiced against the original Rogue Squadron was definitely its difficulty curve and learning curve. So did you guys consciously try to break out of that mold, or is it just a luck thing?
It depends on the level designer, but at least for this level, I tried to kind of ramp the difficulty up slowly. For instance, in the second sub-level, we have just a simple blow up a couple of turrets, and then the prisoners on the train starts moving. The second location where the weapons are stored, it ramps up. The guns are a little more aggressive, and then on the third section, you get the ATPT, some TIE fighters chasing you. It starts ramping up and gets more interesting that way. And then by the time you actually get to your destination, you get a full-on firefight going on. So it was a conscious decision to kind of ramp things up here.
Maybe as an interesting question, what's the difference comparing this to a typical PC game?
Well, your typical PC game is a lot more complex in terms of mission objectives. Also, just your control scheme's a lot more complicated. Definitely, usually they're more semi, so you have a lot of different gadgets and displays that the player has to keep track of. Whereas on something like the shooter on a console title, usually try to be as simple as possible without being just dumbed down. So you can just jump in there and you can immediately fly and have fun. But then the trick here for us, the level designers, is to provide enough depth after players learn the game to provide a little extra so that the more experienced players can enjoy the game as well as the novice.
We've got with us Mario Wagner. Mario is our art director here at Factor 5, and in this case, while Paul Topoulos was the lead artist, Mario still worked on the project and did quite a few things, and his kind of labor of love was the maw and all of the structures on the maw. So I don't know, maybe you want to tell us a little bit about what went into it visually.
I guess we mainly try to achieve a very, I wouldn't say industrial look, but trying to appear quite technical as far as our structures go. We used a lot of chroma keying to really...
Which is what?
which basically means it's a form of alpha texture. It's a 1-bit alpha
which basically
texture.
Means you've got a transparency in the thing, so
Exactly,
you can
yeah.
see through it, right?
So it's basically black and white to spare out things, to create holes. It's cheap and it doesn't cause any problems as far as layering goes. You can just put chroma key in front of chroma key, which gives structures a very fine and detailed appearance. And I guess, what we went for were basically everything is on stilts, like let's say oil drilling stations.
Yeah, the main base idea I think was oil drilling platforms out in the sea,
rigs,
right?
Exactly. Yeah.
What's different working for a platform like GameCube compared to N64 or PlayStation before? Since you worked on all.
I would say you've got more opportunities this time around. And I don't know, like things like texture resolution and all the multiple shaders, which we come to later. Yeah, you can go pretty wild, but you have to keep track of memory.
Yeah. So you would say the biggest problem this generation around for artists is memory? It's
still memory. I think it's memory, and it's also it's a detail level which takes now much more time. All the art assets, just as far as detail and models goes, the overall amount of textures, which were like in the past, we had textures. The biggest one was maybe 128 by 128 on the N64, and now all of a sudden, I don't know, it's like up to 5 times as big.
Almost 10 times. Yeah.
Almost 10 times here, like 1024 by 1024.
All right. Hey guys. So we've got Mr. Clay, who designed the Razor Rendezvous level, the first Star Destroyer level officially. I mean, there was the blown up one in Ison Corridor, but this one, and Thomas again, our technical lead. What do you want to talk about? Well, maybe Chris. The interesting thing is Razor Rendezvous. So what was working about the Star Destroyer and what wasn't?
What was working about it?
Not much, right?
Yeah. We want to talk about the Star Destroyer object itself, or
first maybe the object. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. We actually got the Star Destroyer from Behind the Magic, and when we received it, it was a really sloppy export from 3ds Max into some other file format. And when we received it, it didn't look like a Star Destroyer. It was basically a big triangle glob, sort of, under mountains of really bad polygons. And we essentially had to dig down beneath all these really bad polys and try and figure out what the artist's original intent was for this model. So this Star Destroyer model was like the bane of my existence for about 2 months, trying to rebuild it. One of the challenges of the Star Destroyer was trying to render it in all of the detail that you see in the films. One experience I really wanted the player to have was there's a scene in The Empire Strikes Back where the Falcon flies along the side of the Star Destroyer, and you just see all this detail. And I really was hoping we could do that for this game, which we did. The trick is, how do you present so much detail? Even on a system as advanced as the GameCube, there's a lot of polygons there. So what we did was we made, I'm not sure how you describe it, but sort of a progressive LOD model.
Indeed. I mean, around the area basically which you're playing, what you're seeing, all the glory and all the detail of the Star Destroyer is there. But yet again, the trick is not to do all the work that nobody would appreciate since they don't see it anyways.
Right.
So there's a tremendous amount of very clever culling, as it is called, going on. So that things are not there that don't need to be there.
Right.
Nevertheless, this little baby here, we hardly came across a larger model in games so far, polygon-wise. If you would render all that, what we have here, like it is when we really fly close by, I think we were 137,000, 140,000
About
polygons.
130,000 polys, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Which is most probably the largest model ever in a video game. Yeah.
Right.
It is quite large. It nevertheless has all the gimmicks, like maps and
Bump
on
maps.
it. Bump maps, not to forget.
Yeah.
And, this is a pretty big job.
Yeah.
It also was one of the first things to really prove the power of GameCube, right? Because I remember when we finished the Space World demo, which was the Death Star surface, that basically we jumped in, the very next challenge was, hey, let's try the Star Destroyer, because the Star Destroyer would be proof of concept, because there was always this talk after the first Rogue Squadron, well, what is one of the things which, first of all, Rogue One didn't do, and no game has done up to now decently, which was capital ships.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the ultimate capital ship from the movies is, of course, the Star Destroyer. So that was really a challenge. If we would get the Star Destroyer, which happened all through last year, the later half of last year, if we could get the Star Destroyer thing to work, yes, then we could afford capital ships, which you later on will see very, very nicely in the Battle of Endor, where you've got several of these monsters.
Technology-wise, it gave us a big edge there. Is we reused the same principles for a lot of smaller objects where you wouldn't really think that it would be necessary, but you're of course rewarded by uttermost detail when you come on close.
Aren't you even using it on the medical frigate, which is at the beginning of the
Yeah.
level?
Yeah.
I mean, even that one, which is a, I think 13,000 polygon model, even that is fading out quite a bit of the detail dynamically.
The cool thing about this was, I mean, it certainly forced me anyway to think differently about how LODs are handled. The Star Destroyer, if you look at it in a wireframe view in Maya, and you zoom the camera in and out, all of the detail sort of grows on the model like a fungus, and it's really interesting to watch. It's like this weird grass that grows all over Athens, Georgia, just And that was quite a challenge. I mean, figuring out the best way to present the highest amount of detail to the player. Basically, we only render high amounts of detail when the player is near a certain portion of the Star Destroyer. So yes, there are 130,000 polys in that model, but we render maybe 20.
No, 40. It's more than 40.
40 at a time?
40 at a time, and it gets nasty when you're really close up. But then again, I mean, in Razor Rendezvous, GameCube isn't challenged at this point in time that much anymore.
Right.
But L then later on in Endor simply plugged in two of these Star Destroyers, and suddenly you've got your 100,000 polygons right there.
Next game we'll have a fleet of 10, 20, 30.
He actually wanted to try 13. I don't know.
Did he really?
Memory-wise,
Wow.
yeah, he really wanted to. On the content side of Razor Rendezvous, what is the challenge there? Because it's only one object in a level, so that's it.
Well, first of all, it's a huge surprise because I suspect gamers have never seen anything like the Star Destroyer in any game ever. And
Probably not.
when the mission opens, it's just not part of the mission objectives. It's not part of the mission parameters, so you don't expect to see it. And the level opens, and boom, here you are against this juggernaut with guns blazing, and it's really hard to approach it. Which is why it's such a great mission for the B-Wing, because the B-Wing is, in Star Wars lore, a capital ship killer. It has lots of guns blazing. It's a really sturdy ship, can take a lot of punishment. So that gave us a chance to present the B-Wing, which I don't think we had done prior. So what's happening in this level is the mission is to escort a blockade runner to Rebel Command. And as you arrive on the scene, it's been overtaken by the Star Destroyer. So the trick is to disable the Star Destroyer before it can hyperspace out with the blockade runner, while trying not to destroy the blockade runner in the process. And there's a lot happening. There's lots and lots of guns on the surface of the Star Destroyer model, and we have about, I think, like 27 groups of about 4 TIE fighters each going on. So there's a lot of TIE fighters, more than I've ever seen up until this point. So.
Yeah. How about sound? Because sound is very very impressive in this level. So how does the multi-channel sound work?
The TIE Fighters actually presented more of a problem to sound designer Rudy than you might imagine, because there are so many.
It's Kothlis, and it's Florian Sauer, who's one of our deep down technical nitty-gritty programmers, the guys who are responsible for the engine and who get all the pesky stuff from Thomas as the lead there. And it's Chris Crawford, the LD, who was working on that level. So Kothlis, Kothlis has water. What's the tricky thing about water?
Well, the tricky thing about water is making it look right. And this involves, of course, going to the beach and have a look how it really looks. And like having nice specular reflections and making it also look not too repetitive. It's quite a little bit tricky.
How did the water or what does the water on GameCube do compared to water on N64?
Oh, like first you have all this nice bump mapping things where you can the specular highlights and reflections, and this was something which was not possible on the N64.
No, the PlayStation. How does if you fly up to the islands there? How does the vegetation on the ground work?
The vegetation on the ground is generated on the fly while the player is getting close to the height map, and Tony, I guess, is generating positions based on the height map and on the normals of the height map.
So that's why suddenly it looks like a forest if you really get close to the thing.
And also you save a little bit in render performance, that it's not placed statically all over the place.
What was the main challenge on Kothlis, performance-wise? The water?
Oh yeah, the water, because like underneath the water in many places, of course, there's the height map working as the ocean ground, and therefore you draw the word in that case is like twice. We optimized a little bit in cutting out the tiles underneath the water where it's not necessary.
How about when those ADATs and ATPTs come out of the water and they reflect in the water? Do you how's that done?
Oh, like this is like a little bit. That was a little bit tricky with the mesh stuff, but it's basically placing virtual camera underneath the water level and rendering the AT-AT.
So it's actually two AT-ATs there, if you want. So
yeah, and if you count the shadow in, it's 3 AT-ATs.
Yeah.
Like 2 pre-renders and then 1 main render.
Yeah, the shadow stuff is a good point. I mean, in Hoth, it's probably one of the most prominent things about the shadows. How are the shadows achieved? Is it hard to do?
Oh, it's with the GameCube, it's quite nice to do, but it's like nevertheless lots of bookkeeping stuff that you're like simple things that you're able to render one piece of geometry multiple times during a frame. Like this is something which wasn't there on the N64, so the engine needs to be able to deal with it.
Yeah.
And like with the reflections in particular, it was a little bit tricky, like to cut off the reflections at the water level, that they don't extend underneath the water. That was a little bit very tricky.
Okay. So what's special about Kothlis as a level? I mean, aside from the visuals, Chris, what was the big challenge about it?
Gameplay-wise, well, the design called for multiple craft switching, not just switching from one craft to another. So I have a speeder and a Y-wing in there, and you have to use them both in order to complete the mission. Probably just balancing all the elements, trying to get all the elements to work together, and trying to tell the player what to do as far as like which crafts to switch to and when to use the best craft.
You probably also were the poor level designer who during the whole development time, aside from Jamie on Prefspelt, had the worst looking level for the longest time, right?
That's very true. Yeah, the beautiful water that you see now used to be one big gray sheet.
And there was no sky, because of course since there was no water, the artist kind of refused to touch the level at all, so the sky was terrible.
Yes.
The water was one big chunk of gray thing. The Star Destroyer was a toned down, ugly version of the Star Destroyer in Rendezvous,
yeah,
right?
Literally the same model, just with pieces ripped off, shoved into the ground.
It got its love very late in the development project.
That's true.
Yeah, but Kirscher and Armando did an amazing job with the Star Destroyer.
Yeah, the Star Destroyer looks great. Yeah, definitely. Right, I'm here with Sigmund Vick, who is one of our more technical programmers, and in this case, just like on Battle for Naboo, Sigmund did a lot of the landscape engine part. So why don't you talk a little bit about how does it work that we see a complete landscape in front of us?
The engine itself, it's as you said, or it is actually quite similar to the Battle for Naboo engine and the Rogue engine. It is a height map engine, meaning that every sample, if you would look at a two-dimensional grid, at every point you would have an elevation.
Mm-hmm.
So memory-wise, it's very efficient. That's one of the benefits with the height map approach.
So basically, a height map means you've got what the level designer actually creates, or the artist, is basically just a gray.
A grayscale.
Yeah, it's a gray picture, right?
Yes.
And from the gray picture, then it creates a landscape.
Each grayscale in an image would describe a height at a corresponding point in a two-dimensional grid, and there are, of course, severe drawbacks with an approach like that. For instance, topological. It's since it's basically just two-dimensional.
Mm-hmm.
You can't have caves, and you can't have ridges. It has restrictions. But we figured out that since this project had such a tight time schedule,
mm-hmm.
it was very important that we were doing something we knew how to do, and we really felt that with this approach. And also memory-wise, it's a very efficient way of storing a landscape.
Compared to the old N64 games, I mean, let's say Rogue Squadron or Battle for Naboo, how much more detailed is the landscape really?
It's between 5 and 10 times as many polygons that get pushed through. So that's the biggest difference, and also there's a big difference in the texturing, of course. That's much more advanced this time.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that Nintendo has really made it much more easy for programmers with the GameCube. But on the N64, I mean, I think that it had sort of a potential that never actually got fully used, because it was so difficult to really utilize some of that the power that machine had.
Yeah.
But of course, this time it's a big leap that in terms of performance. Yeah, I really think it makes work more simple for programmers.
Okay, we're here on Pressbelt, which, according to many accounts, people really like nowadays. But in the production history of the game, it was the worst nightmare. So why, maybe coming from the artistic side, Paul, as the lead artist,
right.
What was going on?
Or what was going wrong, you mean? Well, I think part of the problem was that, or not the problem, the air base was the easy thing.
Yeah.
That was the good thing. The problem was just, I don't know, just trying to get a hook on it, some sort of a visual hook on what makes the level interesting visually to look at. And
I think somebody mentioned that in the design meetings. One of the Pressbelt was the only level where we didn't have a visual hook in the design document.
Right. I had one in my mind.
Which was what?
It was the whole sort of canyon. It was going to be like one of those Monument Valley canyons with the actual hangars built into the canyon wall, but that would have meant geometry rather than a height map.
Yeah, yeah. Mm.
Which is kind of.
But the academy looks beautiful. That's not the problem.
Yeah.
The problem was the whole time the landscape. So what's so tricky about this landscape as opposed to Hoth?
Well, I'd say it's probably the inadequacy of the lead artist. I would say it's just the lack of talent and vibrancy of.
Don't flatter yourself. No, but seriously, I mean, what's?
No, I'm being serious too. I mean,
I agree.
Well, I think you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet. You have to try stuff, and this was one of those things that I'd been putting off for months and months, because it was the airbase was easy and the elements, but just thinking of some sort of a compelling landscape, some sort of a tileable painting on the landscape that wouldn't look bad. It's almost like you do have to have an emotional hook, and all the other levels are pretty obvious, but here it's like the main focus is the airbase.
I think we nailed it with the I think we nailed it with the thing that it should be eerie. I think that's one thing which wasn't reflected in the whole design process the whole time. Because in the end, when you come to it, it's a sneak mission, so it should be eerie. So I think with the eerie concept being there earlier, we probably would have found the hook earlier. Talking about the hook, the black stuff which is there right now, in the end was a suggestion by you, Jamie. So what was your problem with Press Build?
My problem with it? It looked so bad for so long. I guess my problem was it didn't know what it wanted to be. There wasn't like a neat theme running through it. And like we said earlier, it wasn't, a lot of the other levels were started with a visual hook. Wouldn't it be cool if it was set in this setting? But this one was all about, here is the mission where you steal the shuttle.
The interesting thing though about Press Build is that, of course, what is very strong in it is the gameplay element.
Yes, that's because that's what we worked on for so long. That got a lot of attention.
Yeah.
Well, I think finally when you get to the base, it is, I mean, I think that's what we would always talk about is how cool it would be to see the pilots all running out to their ships, and that was the whole thing that we would ever discuss. It wouldn't be like, you know, I don't think any of us ever talked about how great canyons are and how
the color scheme would be.
Yeah.
The Academy is a lot of fun, and once again, it uses all of Tony Wong's troop commands to have them all running from the barracks and into ties that take off. I mean, it's one of my favorite parts of the game because it's like sticking a stick inside a beehive and watching it all react to you, and still having a chance to fight your way out.
Yeah,
it's pretty frantic.
Any secrets you can tell about it or hint at?
Kill pilots. It'll make it easier.
Okay. All right. We're on to Bespin, which was one of the showcase levels at E3, and I guess as I put it somewhere, our make and break level, because we were always aware of the fact that if early on, I think in our February meeting when the game started, everybody said, okay, if we can pull off Bespin till E3, then the game is possible for launch and for Christmas. If we can't do that, either we have to drop Bespin, or in general, the more general message is we're dead in the water. So what was so tricky about Bespin? I mean, let's talk about it from both the content side and from the technical side. Maybe content side first. What was the problem there?
Well, I mean, Bespin's split up into two parts.
Yeah.
I'd like to talk about the part we started first was the city, which was a huge technical hurdle. And the content, the difficult part there was to create a city that was elaborate enough to be next generation, but that could still run at a decent frame rate and still be navigatable to have dogfights in. That was the big hurdle for me.
Who did you create the buildings, or?
Yeah, I created all the tiles and buildings.
Yeah. So how's the city in general working flow?
The city was also like the first big test for all the different shaders, because many of the buildings have like reflection, specular highlights, bump maps, and all this stuff together.
So what are shaders doing for the technical?
Oh yeah, the shaders take a set of information which describe how to like render on screen a certain part of geometry. So like it's two different things. It has the geometry and the shader information, and the shader information says how the geometry looks. And of course, the N64, this was like just textures, and on a Dolphin it's like way more complicated. So you have specular highlight, which make a big impression, the bump map, which add like more detail, which is very important, and the reflectivity when something mirrors in like chromic or metallic surfaces.
How are those clouds in the first part working?
Oh, that was Thomas doing volumetric fog. The trick about the volumetric fog is that you have objects intersecting the clouds, and you want to have objects which are just a little bit in fog, of course just a little bit fogged. So like you have to pre-render things just another time to figure out how much they are intersecting with the clouds. And when you have this information, you can, based on that, you can like compute the fog color per pixel.
Yeah.
Technical stuff.
Okay. What was the base concept behind Bespin? Because I mean it's similar to the first Rogue, in the sense that you've got the gas platforms around, but the premise is kind of reverse, right?
Yeah, this time around you're trying to actually preserve the gas containers in the first area of the game and the second area. But I guess like the overall premise is the first level portion of the level is pre-flight, dogfighting through clouds and whatnot, and then you step it up in the second level with the claustrophobia of doing that inside a city in trenches.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How was, for example, those ties here? They're a little bit more aggressive than in the early parts of the game. How long does it take to tweak one of these enemies to behave like you want it?
We're not done yet. They're tweaking constantly.
Yeah.
No, it did take a lot of back and forth to get them to a point where they're entertaining, and then also fitting into the difficulty context of where it is inside the game. And whether you
how do you do it? I mean, what do you have as your palette or arsenal?
What I get to work with is basically their speeds remain constant in the game, so that way you can judge, whether you're chasing them and if you can catch up to them where they are on the screen. What I get to work with is how fast they can turn and how well they can pursue you, basically how intelligent they are.
Mm-hmm.
And then you couple that with how well they can aim and how often they'll fire at you, and that's a way to get a good enemy chasing you.
Yeah, yeah. And you just try out the game over and over and over, or how does it work for a level designer?
Well, we try it out over and over again, but then we get a little too good at it and have to watch other people play. And if they're constantly spinning and spinning and spinning, we know that things are a little too hard if they can't chase the time.
Yeah, obviously.
But that's where the test department comes in.
How did the balloons come about? Because the balloons are kind of unusual with the burners inside, right? Was that the concept right from the start?
No, I don't think it was. I don't even think right from the start balloons were just scenery, and then it was putting lasers on them made them actually functional and a threat from the air. And I think burners came in when we started using Mike Keith's physics code to have the balloons explode and drape down on the buildings below. Yeah. And I think burners were just an easy weak point to put in there.
Okay.
Well, that makes it nice because it basically has the option to shoot down the burners or like tackle the guns, which is a little bit harder.
Yeah. Yep, if you want to show off, you take out all the guns.
Yeah. What was the biggest problem in terms of Bespin? The one main thing which I remember is memory, right?
Yeah, it was cramming all of this in there. I mean, you also have that height map data that's used normally to create landscapes of rolling hills, coupled with a tile-based.
What is it doing here?
In this level, we're using the height map data to create basically one giant mound that is the curvature outside the city.
Mm-hmm. Any slight hints of how to play especially cleverly in the level?
Cloud cars aren't as weak as you think they are.
Okay.
They're around for a reason.
Yeah. Alrighty. So people should look for the craft changes. The Battle of Endor. There's only one more level left, at least of the official ones. So, first of all, cutscenes. Since we've got pretty elaborate cutscenes, what can you tell us about them?
Unfortunately, I can't take credit for these. These were done by Tobias Richter. They were actually the first cutscenes he did on the game, and they really came out quite nice. Tobias has a lot of experience flying around big, huge, heavy ships, so this was perfectly suited towards his skills, and he really outdid every expectation that could have had for him. It's really quite impressive.
What's the trickiest thing about capital ships and animating them, or larger mounds?
Well, the speed issue of just working with such a massive amount of data. You guys are seeing all these ships moving around at 60 frames a second. When we're working on them, we're lucky if they move at 6 frames a minute. And I'm not. It's seriously. Everything here has been optimized to move really quickly, and the data we work with is a lot, dirty or messier within our application that we use to animate. But the thing is that they're very slow, and they move like gigantic whales, and it's really hard to make that seem exciting.
What's different in terms of, because you see it even in the cutscenes in the game, something which I really like. What was different between the ILM shots in Jedi and in Star Wars?
Well, Star Wars was originally done in 1977 with technology that pretty much didn't exist till they invented it. And by the time Jedi came around in 1983, everyone had pretty much learned how to do everything. John Dykstra had perfected the motion control camera and had gone on to do Battlestar Galactica and stuff, and he really knew how to fly a camera around and put in layer after layer after layer of elements. to really give a sense of dynamic motion. It's more instead of just something happening in front of the camera, it's the camera and the what we call actors interacting with each other.
Mm-hmm. So it's just the camera movements are much more dynamic.
Much more dynamic and just sheer numbers of things.
Yeah.
And luckily, we don't have to composite.
Yeah, which the movie guys have to do, yeah, or had to do at the time. Tony Wong, who was one of the programmers on the project. You did the enemy AI. What's different about these enemies compared to previous enemies in a flight game?
Right. I guess one of the main things is normally the LD would just place down a pass where they're going to follow and sort of do most of the movement. Whereas with these guys, they're working out where the player is, where their target is. If they're being shot, they'll know that and they'll try and avoid it. So I guess it sort of makes it easier for the LD, so they don't have to account for all the variables. And I guess it makes it more responsive and more immersive because they react more to what the player's doing as opposed to some set plan that the LD's put down.
Yeah. Al, how many of these intelligent guys are you using, and how many classic ones are in this battle?
Well, I mean, we definitely couldn't have recreated this spectacular Battle of Endor without Tony's awesome AI. I mean, we have about maximum of 40 flocks going on, Imperial and Rebels.
Flocks are these super intelligent AI things?
Yeah, they're just, I just set them up, let them go, and they just do their thing, and it definitely gives us a more dynamic, action-packed type of feel than just stuff running on a spline.
Where does flock come from? As in, why is it called a flock?
I guess it's from flock of birds. I guess that's where.
Yeah. So they behave like birds, which means they've got a leader, and everybody else is according to certain rules, is following the leader.
And they're just following the guy.
Yeah. Okay. How long does it take to stage a battle like this? I mean, how many enemy craft are in here?
I think if we showed every single one of them all at once, we'd have at least, probably hovering around 100 ships. So we are pushing a lot of stuff around, and it's just GameCube's just amazing how much stuff it can push around at any one time. I mean, previous games like X-Wing Alliance or any of the Larry Holland games, I mean, they were pushing maybe 30, 40 ships at a time, and we're just blowing them away with what we got here. I mean, we're able to do the full squadron attacks, plus all the capital ship combat that you see in the movie.
What else is special about the Battle of Endor? Is it just the sheer numbers, or?
Well, I mean, basically, I wanted to recreate the sheer epic scale of the battle from the movie, but also show sequences that the movie didn't really elaborate on, such as the initial attacks on the Star Destroyers. And so in the second sub-level, you do engage 2 Star Destroyers for the first time, and you actually see Admiral Akbar's Home 1 capital ship, basically duke it out with the 2 Star Destroyers. So it's something you didn't really see in the movie, but I wanted to elaborate on.
But it's heavily suggested in there, right?
It's heavily suggested, but it's something, I think players would enjoy being around, at least.
Yeah.
Huge capital ship battles.
I'm here with Mike Heath, who has programmed all of the controls in the game, which means if you don't like the control, he's the person responsible for it. If you love it, or if you've never thought about the controls, which would be the best thing happening, then he's also responsible for it. Maybe what's the secret of a good game control?
Well, basically, it has to be intuitive for pretty much anyone who picks it up, and that was the main difficulty with Rogue 2, in that we were trying to do a full 3D flight game and yet have intuitive 2D controls.
Yeah. What makes a flight game easy to control, and what's the hard part about it? Because I remember that a lot of people were, after Rogue Squadron, were saying the controls were great, now do space. So we did space in Naboo, and a lot of people didn't get to grips with the space controls. So what's the big difference between a landscape below you and a space level?
The main difference is that with space, there's no real plane of reference for the player, and the big difficulty really is just being able to work out what the player wants to do in all situations, and without any kind of plane of reference, that makes it rather difficult.
So basically, what's the maximum control level? What the normal person understands is it's basically car control, right?
Yeah.
So as if you're on a street, just transposed into air.
That's right.
And then in space, the trick is the 360 degrees that you can fly everywhere.
Yeah.
But you would still expect car controls.
Yeah. You basically have to be able to work out where you are at any point and where you want to go. And with full 3D space, that's very difficult. So
specifically, players probably think they are playing with the same control the whole time. At least if you succeeded, if we succeeded in together with QA in designing that. But in reality, we've got a couple of different controls going on, right?
Yeah, and there's two main different controls, one for space levels and one for height map and tile levels. In some levels there's actually a combination. The main difference is that with this, as say like with space levels, there's no real plane of reference for the player.
But what happens if there really is one, like in the second part of Death Star 2, and it's a confusing one?
Oh, in second part of Death Star 2, what I did was, what we did was for certain parts of it, where it turned into a real 3D environment, it switched over to the space controls.
So basically, when you're going down, for example, and you're suddenly not in a car plane control thing, then it's space controls. We also have Chris Cly, who's level designer on Death Star 2. What was the specific problem? I mean, the surface thing is a variation of the first level with the pressure of protecting the Falcon.
Right.
But the second part, of course, was the much more challenging. What was so problematic about it?
In terms of control, you mean, or
not so much control, everything. I mean,
everything. Yeah. Well, basically, Jamie Ermacher, one of our LDs, was good enough to. He spent a lot of time doing research and putting together all these little segments of the DS2 tunnel. Mm-hmm. And we knew we had to take a modular approach to the tunnel. We couldn't build it all as one long thing, so we had to build it in segments and then assemble those and sort of mix and match them. The biggest challenge for me was actually trying to work out the Falcon, its path through the tunnel, mm-hmm. and also the TIE fighters, because that stuff had to be very dramatic. We wanted the Falcon and the TIE fighters to sort of roll and do all these crazy things in the tunnel while just narrowly missing obstacles. So that was quite a challenge. And also in terms of control, we wanted to surprise the player by introducing a bit of a vertical element. So there's this one segment of the tunnel where you go straight down. Mm-hmm. And as Mike mentioned before, that's where we, at that point, we're sort of cheating a bit with the controls, because we turned off the standard height map controls, which are a lot like car controls in that they level out automatically.
Yeah.
And we're turning that stuff off and turning on the space control, so that the player isn't leveling off and hitting his head on the ceiling.
Chris Crawford and Paul Topoulos, and we're in the first bonus level, Death Star Escape. And one of the main things, or the main thing in the whole level, is the cockpit here, because there's not much else on screen. But in general, there are these really, really high polygon models in the whole game. So what's the problem, or how long does it take to create one of these cockpits?
I think with Bespin took, it was a couple weeks, I think.
Mm.
But it was just finding good reference material and just being, it was a pretty big task, because it was 3 big paintings, the largest kind of paintings that we could have in a game, plus a whole lot of geometry and just a whole lot of buttons and illumination maps, and then we figured out that we needed to put some bump maps in there as well.
Yeah. What's the, was there controversy? Because obviously Rogue Squadron had cockpits. Battle for Naboo didn't have cockpits. So early on, was there right away everybody was settled on cockpits, or
Well, I mean, to me, it's the cockpits make a huge difference. I mean, they did on the original Rogue Squadron. I mean, I think that the fact that we were able to pull off so many so quickly, I thought was really a good testament to our modelers.
Yeah. What's the special trick about making a cockpit or a Star Wars model, maybe in general, because in the cockpits you probably have the best examples of that, to look like classic Star Wars?
I think mainly the big thing is to tell a story, a visual story of how these things have been used. I mean, it's not like Star Trek or 2001, which have a very sterile feeling to it. I think part of the biggest thing is to give some sort of logical sense that the thing's been used, and just sort of beat the pants off of it with scratch marks and paint scraping off and all that kind of stuff, which I think is very unique to Star Wars, where it feels like a real world, very livable.
How do you avoid the 70s cheap look, the Space 1999?
Well, I thought, to me, the funniest thing was looking back at the reference and seeing that there was some cheese there. I mean, you look at Vader's TIE Fighter, and it is, like Florian said, it was 70s stereo parts. It was knobs and things, and I think that's one of the interesting things about the game is that looking back at the reference, that there was some pretty cheap stuff. But it's not how people remember it, and so for us to do some stuff traditionally the way it was, it does look a little bit 70s-ish.
Yeah, that's true. I remember that one reference shot from the Y-wing where you see the bubble wrap all over the place in the cockpit.
Yeah, that's nice to be. Yeah, no, but it somehow just works.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on to Chris Crawford and the level here. It's just gunning down stuff. How do you create one of that levels?
Well, actually, the cockpit itself is just sitting out in space. There isn't actually a Millennium Falcon out there at all. It's strictly just the cockpit. And then I basically put all the TIE fighters on these splines and tell them where to go.
So there's no AI whatsoever going on.
There's no AI at all. No, it's just me pretending to be an animator.
So basically, the player who's really, really good can learn this 100%, right?
That is true.
Yeah. So if you want to get a gold, you just have to get absolutely perfect about it. Yeah. Paul, one of the main things everybody was joking about during the production was, of course, that everything is monochromatic. Is Star Wars really just gray and white?
Well, yes. No. I think that there is a theme that you hear about George talking about, which would be sort of earth tones for the good side and very sort of monochromatic grays and blacks for the Imperial side. So, you do sort of get this sort of Earth Mother symbolizing good. I think that computer games in general tend to be very, very saturated. And I think that that's one of the good things about what we're trying to do is just be a little bit different than a lot of games and try and make this a little bit more like movie special effects, which would be trying to go for something more photorealistic than stylized. Because I think people want to play the movie. And so I think that we've tried to make something that resembles the film rather than necessarily just a video game of the film.
Which brings up the whole question of or the story of the engine exhausts on the ships, which in the Space World demo were accurate to the movie,
but not necessarily dynamic for a game.
Yeah. Then they were dynamic for a game with a huge petition of fans, an outcry of fans who wanted to have it like the movie.
Right. Well, and you're always telling me that it's a game, not a movie. So it's. Strike that delicate balance. It's a razor's edge that you gotta walk.
Hopefully, in the end, it's going to be that. Yeah. All right, we've got Rudy Stember, and Chris Holzbeck. Chris is music director, and Rudy is the sound effects guy or the sound designer, as we call it in movies and games nowadays. So let's start with you. What's the challenge about making sound effects for a game?
You mean specifically Rogue 2 or any game
Maybe
at all?
in general, and then the specific problems for Rogue 2.
In general, it's always a memory problem. People don't have enough memory to store all the sound effects the sound designer wants to do. normally. In cartridge games it was very nice because with all the ROM we can blow up with all the sound effects, but nowadays with GameCube everything is very small.
You're probably the first person ever to complain about this compared to cartridge. But in terms of small, I mean, how many sound effects does Rogue Leader, for example, have?
That's a tricky question because we're using musics, of course, and using that, the real sound effect count you have on the programmer side, which they can call, is about 490 or something, 500 sound effects.
Mhm.
But on the other side, if you just go into a cockpit, you have a lot of sound effects going on. If you go into the cockpit, you have having a stereo sample going on, you have beeps and clicks going on all the time, and other things. So the real count of sound effects, which are running at the same time, are about 800, 900.
Yeah. And basically, how are they created? Are you getting the sound effects material from Lucasfilm guys who did them for the movies, or how does it work?
Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Over the years we did a lot of Star Wars games, so I have my own library with sound effects from the movies, and if I need something specifically I have to ask over at LucasArts, and it takes a long time to get stuff from the ranch, but back to Rebel Assault 2 days, we got a lot of sound effects then, and I'm still using them, then requesting new ones. Yeah, it's really fun now watching the game having the sound effects all redone. If you listen to the sound effects you get from the ranch, it sounds like the 70s, right? It's very low on high frequencies and very low dynamics, and they need some work. And if you do sound effects for the movies, if they remaster the movies, they did remaster to the whole tracks. But now we have the opportunity to remaster every single sound effect to make it sound right and then make a new mix.
Yeah.
So.
All right, we're playing the asteroid field here. So what was the specific problem about the asteroid field and the ties in there?
Yeah, coming from Rogue One, where we had just 2 TIE fighters flying at the same time, audio-wise. I mean, there were more, but you couldn't hear just 2. Now in Rogue Leader we have a maximum of 8 at the same time you can hear, which gets new problems for you, which is if you hear 8 TIE fighters at the same time, yeah, you definitely have some distortion going on, and you really need to mix that down and get that under control, what's going on. This is a completely different problem than we had in other console games before, because
the graphics can display so much.
Yes,
we have a much bigger problem.
I mean, in Rogue One we had a maximum wave of 7 TIE fighters going on, and you hear 2, and now we have, what, 50, 60,000? I don't know. Yeah, in Rogue One we had 7 voices for sound effects.
Yeah. Which means you have to getting the balance for every level is much harder.
It's much harder. It's much more work. It's not harder. It's much more work. It's like you're having a mixing console with 400 faders, and you need to control everything and have everything in the same volume range going on.
Yeah.
And back in Rogue One we had about 119 sound effects, and it's nothing compared to games nowadays.
Yeah. To my right I've got Chris Hülsbeck, who's the music director on the project, which in this case meant what, Chris?
Well, I had the difficult task to find a way to do all the music cues. Like there are parts of the soundtrack that we stream, and there are other parts that have to be MIDI.
Stream means original stuff which Williams recorded with the orchestra, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and MIDI means
MIDI always
the sound chip.
Yeah.
The sound chip sound. Yeah.
Exactly. MIDI sounds always so bad, but we could call it like real-time rendered audio, which sounds already better. And yeah, it was not that easy to find a way that it doesn't sound that different between the two. And I spent a lot of time on the sound set to make it sound really, really good in terms of orchestra emulation.
So basically, what are you doing? Because obviously Williams had 300 people sitting there. So his pieces, when you look at the Battle of Hoth, you hear his pieces playing, and it's obviously the orchestra. So then as soon as the player hears an original piece, which isn't on the soundtracks, it's GameCube sound chip doing it, right? So What did you have to create for that? So where's your orchestra sitting?
Well, it's just it comes down to a lot of work on the different instrument samples to make them sound bigger. So we have ensemble instruments that are already like sounding like a couple of trumpets or string ensembles and stuff like that, and so you can create the illusion there's more playing than what is actually playing in terms of voices. And then we have also this very good reverb that is also doing its part, and overall it sounds pretty convincing.
How does the whole interactive music thing work? Because I mean, you've got, when you're flying into the level, you've got one piece playing, then the music seems to change. What's the concept behind that?
Well, there's we have like ranges that we can define in the levels, areas that have a specific theme, and it's also tied to the gameplay, if there's something going on in that area or not. And it basically fades the pieces over, and it's really interesting because sometimes you're not realizing that it goes from a soundtrack stream to a MIDI piece, and it does a pretty good job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The original compositions were done by you and Jake Jacobson in LA, right? How close are you guys sticking to Williams there?
Well, we always try to keep it in the same kind of style, and sometimes it's really difficult because Williams is such a great composer, and a game is somewhat different from the movie soundtrack. I mean, you don't have this total linear way of predicting what's happening, so it's sometimes difficult, but I think we did a pretty good job, and it doesn't sound too different.
We're here with Chuck McFadden, who is our lead tester, lead QA person, and I don't think anybody out there knows what a tester or a QA person is really doing, so tell us about that.
I think a common misconception of a QA tester is that they play games all day, and
you do,
and that it's a fun factory. Uh-huh. And we generally we do play games all day, but we play it in much more of a critical manner than the average gamer.
So when did you? I mean, right now it's early September. When did you start looking at Rogue Leader?
Oh man, March, I think.
So when the project just was a month and a half.
When there was actually a level that was able to be played, was when I was starting to look at it.
So how much does a game progress from that point where QA does start out looking at it towards a final product?
It progresses phenomenally. I mean, when it starts out, it's not even really a game. It's just a coming together of geometry, and then it takes baby steps to where it becomes a game, and that's where it is now, where it feels more like a game.
So what's the frustrating part of being a tester, the baby steps?
The frustrating part of being a tester is keeping your objectivity, where you want to tell people, like the level designers or the programmers, what is fun or what isn't fun, and you want to tell them from the perspective of someone who is new to the game, but then as a tester you've been playing the game for months and months and months. So the challenge and the frustrating part of that is keeping the objectivity of, sure, I've been playing it for 3-6 months, but pretending like it's the first time you've played it.
Mm. Do you think that's possible at all?
No, I don't think it's entirely possible to get that 100%, but I think that it's important to try. And to try to give the most honest, again, objective opinion that you can is the only thing that you can do.
Yeah. What's the toughest part about being a tester?
I'm sure everybody answers this for all their jobs, but I guess it's the hours.
I haven't asked the question to anybody else.
Really?
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's the hours. Especially when you get to the end of the project where everything is just coming together so fast. It can get really hard, especially, I try to maintain a life outside of work, and that can be difficult.
Not in the games industry.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. How many people are testing Rogue?
6 right now.
Oh.
We just added another tester. We generally, when we start out, we only start out with 1 or 2. But then as we get farther along and more things in the game come together, we add more, and we're at 6 now, and we're probably going to stay at 6 until the end of the project.
Yeah. how much influence do you guys feel, at least, that you have on the project?
Well, that's a kind of a delicate balance. You want to give your opinion, but we aren't programmers and we aren't level designers, and we make a big mistake if we try to take that role.
Mm-hmm.
But I think for this project specifically, I think our opinion has at least been considered.
It would be my job. So
and weighed for whatever it's worth, which is more than I can say for some of the games I've been on. Other games have actually taken our opinion farther than this game has.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that was a good decision or not is kind of a matter of opinion.
Yeah.
But
once again, because of the balance. Because
right.
I mean, what I've experienced on games is that if you give too much emphasis to QA, it might happen that you end up with a game which is geared much too much towards somebody who has been playing it for almost all of its development cycle.
Yeah, at the end of a project, a QA person always wants the game to be harder than it really should be.
Yeah. That's a common mistake probably. If you listen too much to QA, that you make it too hard, which I would still contest was the big mistake, if there was one big mistake on Rogue Squadron 1, which was that in the end everybody got panicky because QA wanted to have it harder, and certain levels were almost unplayable for the casual gamer.
And the thing is, though, that you even on bulletin boards or magazine reviews or whatever, you hear people saying that they wanted this to be harder or that to be easier, and you try to take that into account, but even those people are the people that have played the game a lot, and you want to be attractive to the people who are just going to buy the game, the 12-year-olds who are going to play the game and make it accessible to them as well.
The person who just wants to spend or can spend maybe an hour a day on it should have fun with it.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably what it's about.
The difficulty should come for this game specifically in the higher metals and stuff. Shouldn't be in the basic game.
Yeah. Right next to me, Brian Kruger, who is the what's your official title? Tool programmer and
fireman.
And fireman. Okay, so the fireman type. And we're here on Radon Yavin. So on the tool programmer side, maybe first of all, you've been responsible for the last couple of years for the general level design tool here. What's that?
Well, level design tool is a Windows program that you've heard a lot of level designers on this commentary, and they run that program, and it gives them a three-dimensional representation of what the level will be, and they place everything in there. They place the buildings, they place the ships, they place anything that you see in a level, they place in that tool. And then they also have a whole bunch of different little windows they can launch that allow them to do all of the game logic. So Holger designed a system called C-Punch, which we built for Battle for Naboo, which is our scripting system, proprietary system, and we integrated that into the level design tool so that all of the decisions that all of the objects in the game make, like should I turn left, should I turn right, who should I shoot at, are all under their control, and it's very easy for them to just use the mouse.
And you can't buy something like that on the open market?
No. In fact, the level design tool is under constant revision because there's always some new trick that we need to do for any given level in the game. For example, this level, Yavin, required me to create a special version of the level editor just for this level because you might notice an awful lot of trees in this level, and in order to get them in the right place relative to the world in general, it would have taken one person forever to place each and every tree on their own by hand with the tool. So I actually made a special version of the tool that only I ran that put the trees down automatically, and then we went in by hand and adjusted some things to make it a little a little more refined.
So in the end, do you have to place the trees, or are the level designers then placing them, or?
Let's see. In this level, I placed probably about 3/4 of the trees, but a lot of that work was done by my tool, as opposed to by me sitting there going, click, click, put a tree here, put a tree there.
So the basic thing about a level design tool is really being flexible enough to meet the demands. If something in the game isn't going right, or it needs to be finished quickly, right?
Right. It can never. It should never crash. It should be easy to change and reconfigure and just turn it inside out and make it do whatever they need it to do. You have to be very open-ended in the way you write that kind of a program.
Holger, in general about GameCube, one of the things which Nintendo is claiming, or what they were going for, is obviously fast loading times. Why do a lot of games have very, very long loading times on consoles, and why do certain games not have long loading times?
Well, you really have to think about what you're going to load before you set out to make the game, basically. You have to not load things that you don't really need, and put them in a specific order to make them load fast. So we actually take some things and store it several times to make them load faster. So if we know that this level, for example, has TIE fighters and Imperial shuttles and this, then we just pack them together into one big file and store that on the DVD. The DVD, luckily, is big enough so we don't get a problem with storing things several times.
Are you still using compression techniques back from the cartridge days?
Of course. I mean, even though there's texture compression and everything, we always get a nice little compression out of it of about 30 to 40%, and that's shaved off the loading time right there.
So basically the CPU is, while you're loading, is already uncompressing the data so that you've got it there.
Well, on the GameCube, the CPU doesn't really have to do anything to load. So it's just sitting around doing nothing while it's waiting for the data to arrive from the DVD. So we can use that time to decompress the data that's already there.
Anything in terms of the how does the machine handle the full motion video? Since it's not since it cannot play back DVD movies, how's the movie playback done?
In our case, it's just a string of separate pictures.
So basically just taking that.
It's kind of like MPEG without the in-between pictures.
How about the level side of Death Star 2 Endurance here? What's the basic idea? It's the very last level. The player has unlocked, of course, all of the other missions. So what's this about?
Well, it's basically we just wanted to have some fun and actually challenge the player, really challenge the player, because we figured by this time the player's quite good at the game if he's been able to unlock this level. So we decided to do something like an old school classic arcade game where there is no end in sight. Basically just wave upon waves of TIE fighters and every Imperial craft imaginable, and we throw it at the player and he only has a very limited life, I think just one life actually, and so he has to survive. It's kind of like a little salute to the hardcore gamers out there, who still remember the old Pac-Mans or the Galagas or the Galaxians.
So in general, I mean, does it also, was that the foundation for Rogue, or what would you think where the game comes from most, the arcade side, or is it more the simulation side, which was done before on the PC side of things?
Well, I think we take the best of both worlds. I mean, we take the user friendliness of a classic arcade game where you just put a coin in there, pick it up, and have fun for your first 5 minutes. We have that, and then we have the complexity and the depth of your typical PC sim game, where it's like you do more than just blow stuff up.
Yeah.
You have to protect things, you have to escort things, you have to hit things strategically, you have to actually, and in Rogue Leader you actually command wingmen.
Something which you couldn't do in an arcade game just because of the shortness of an individual coin.
Definitely. It's a different mentality. I mean, for a stand-up arcade coin-operated game, the whole idea is to get as much coinage from the player as possible. So obviously, gameplay is very short, very quick, and it usually is very hard for the player to continue playing over and over again. Where when you buy a game for console use, you want the experience to last quite a bit of time because you want value for the player.
So what's your favorite arcade game?
Well, favorite arcade game of all time, probably the original Star Wars arcade game, or maybe Galaxian.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, we're here with Jens Petersam, which is one of the senior programmers at Factor 5, and who worked on Rogue Squadron, Animaniacs, and a lot of other games. And Thomas Engel, our technical director, once again. First point to talk about, Jens, you did a lot of the cutscene programming, but also special effect programming on both Rogue Squadron and Rogue Leader. What's the trick about special effects for video games?
Well, that's actually easy. Loads of particles which you can never have enough of. Good looking explosions, also extremely important. And actually enough time to do all that, which is usually a little short. So,
he wants to say if it sucks, then it is actually not his fault. It's just time. The space-time continuum basically killed him.
It's just that I can't be blamed for everything.
Yeah, that's true. So what's different from the movies, for example? I mean, when do you decide to do something over the top, which in the movie is different?
Well, the movie unfortunately doesn't really show us much. I mean, there is no battle in the movie going on any kind of level that we have, type notes or terrain or anything. So this is all just pure fiction we try to come up with. What could it look like? What could fit in the Star Wars universe?
So not even in the Hoth battle in the movie you ever see how lasers really hit the snow and everything, right?
No, well, sorta. I mean, when something hits, then it's usually a puff of black smoke. But the lasers themselves, I mean, when you look at the movie, you go by it like frame by frame. You can see that the lasers are just painted in there anyways. And that even when they hit somewhere, the effect doesn't even show up in the proper location. So they usually cover that up with something really large, like a black cloud of smoke or an explosion of sorts. And that's actually the most that you ever get to see in one of these movies of special effects. So it's really not much choice there. So coming up with something more which we need in these games is a little bit difficult because you have no template on what to base it on. To invent something that might look kind of cool but not completely violate what you're used to seeing in pictures.
The explosions are done how? That's basically just little movies?
Yeah, the explosion there consists of about 40 individual frames of animation, actually neatly blended against each other so they yield 80 frames. And yeah, that's actually all you can consider this as a small movie if you so will. It's actually just a collection of textures plated sequence.
Yeah. Thomas, how about what was the biggest problem on Rogue Leader compared to previous games in terms of size?
Size. Every aspect? About everything, actually. If people think about next-gen games, they want to see something really, 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 well, quote-unquote, next-gen, which mostly means breathtaking, large, huge, never seen before, whatever, stereo, quadruple funny, stereo visuals, whatever, colorful, blah. And all this in all aspects of the whole production actually enlarges things greatly. We have more visuals, more audio, more whatever, and every part of the system is stretched quite thin. So also had to learn our IS guy, good old Rene, who was very proud of his new. Very professional server and backup system and whatever, and we were all so happy with it and could back up everything in no time. And we were saying, well, we don't do that full motion video stuff. We just do real games with real-time generated graphics, so the data won't really get that big. Well, these days actually we have problems with backupping the data, not size-wise actually that much, but time-wise, because people are here. As we sit here, it's actually dark outside, and people are here pretty much 22 hours of the day, and he has actually a problem backing up the remaining 2 hours of the day without disturbing the overall production. So it's pretty big.
It's also size-wise quite enormous. Like
Yeah, well, it is.
years ago on what was it? Rebel Assault 2 PlayStation, which was nothing but full motion video. We already had to deal with loads of data just for the video.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, oddly enough, everything still fit on a single 9 gigabyte hard drive on the server. And now it had to be a 202 gigabyte RAID system.
And that does not cover our full motion video needs for the little video snippets that you see on the front end.
No.
By far
For
not.
that we needed about 400 gigabytes on a very cheap server.
Yeah.
And the problem is really also backing up that data. It's just taking forever. I mean, of that 202 gigabytes on the server, about 90 are only available. So you do the math and you know what data we're currently handling here.
Yeah, it's quite a bit that you need to push around, and if you know that GameCube discs are just 1.5, 1.6 gigabytes, I think roughly size-wise, then expect 10, 20-fold that amount of data actually sitting on a server at the game development company, because people have to keep versions, they have to keep data material that they actually can edit. That's not just sitting there in the final form. So it's pretty huge.
Mm-hmm.